I thought we would begin with our story. So we have 2 weeks of camping. This week's story is Curious George Goes Camping. Curious George is mine and my youngest daughter's absolute favorite. She has a whole Curious George room, even though she's 22 years old. Um, so I'm going to read Curious George Goes Camping. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. This weekend, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. Let's see. What does it look like they're doing there? It's like they have a bag of stuff and maybe a cooler, a sleeping bag. At the campsite, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear while George looked at all the tents. He saw tents for big families and one just the right size for a puppy. Oh, do you see that? A little puppy tent just for the puppy, and then the big tents for the big families. There were even tents on wheels. Would you like to help me put up our tent, George? The man asked. You see a tent on wheels? I think that's called a camper. There's our camper right there, a camper. George was very happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought, but it wasn't easy. George, why don't you fill our bucket with water at the pump? We'll need it by the campfire later when we roast marshmallows. Do you see George trying to put together that tent? Looks to me like he's getting lost inside the tent. Marshmallows. George loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them toasted. Now don't wander off and get into trouble, the man said, but George did not hear him. He was already gone. Uh-oh. There's George and his curiosity again. At the pump, George worked the handle up and down, up and down, up and down, pumping the water. Soon his bucket was full. On the way back, he saw a family who was packing up their stuff. George watched the girl put her bucket of water on the campfire. The fire sizzled out. George thought that looked like fun. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. Hey, yelled the camper. We weren't finished with that yet. Why did you put out our fire? Then there was a deer as George was running through the woods. A deer was running through the woods too. George got lost while he was running. He felt tired and he stopped to rest. At first he was worried. He was very, very far from camp. But there were lots of other animals to keep him company. What kind of animals do you see? Let's see. I see a moose. I see a bear. Oh, there's so many. I see some bunnies. See what you can see. What other kinds of animals do you see? I see George right there. Oh no, George is with the skunk. Pee-you! He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel chattering in a tree. Then he saw a tail of a black and white kitty, but that wasn't a kitty, was it? It was a skunk. He was curious. Would the kitty like to play? George gently pulled the kitty out. But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk. Pee-you! And it was scared. The skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Shoo! Stinky! The animals tried to get away. George wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him. How could he ever get rid of this awful smell all over his fur? Too bad. He would have to take a bath in the woods. Then George had an idea. Oh, he could wash off in the creek. That would be fun. Look at George. He's jumping in the water. He's jumping off there. He splashed and he scrubbed, but he was still stinky. And now he was wet, too. But what could he do? George thought and thought. If he climbed the trees, he could swing from tree to tree and dry off. Nope, even drying high up in the tree, George did not smell better. Poor George. He wished he wasn't so far from the camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, George heard footsteps. It was the animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary, and George saw it too. It was a fire. Oh no! George had gotten into trouble for putting out one fire, but this fire wasn't in the campground. This was an emergency. Quickly, George climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water from the creek. Then, being careful not to spill it, he climbed back up and swung from branch to branch. When George got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire. And then George's friend rushed out of the forest with the rangers. George! I was afraid you would be here. It's a good thing you were, George, the ranger said. We saw smoke from the campground. You put it out just in time. George was so glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see George was safe. But George had a funny look on his face. George, he asked, what is that smell? P.U. Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of the smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, oh, look at that. He's taking a bath in tomato juice. Yuck! George smelled fine. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook dinner with them over their small campfire. Fires can be nice if you're careful, said the ranger. And there they're roasting marshmallows. Yum, 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 yum. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows. There he is. He's got 3 marshmallows. 1, 2, 3. Here's George. The end.